The sky over Germany during World War II was no longer a place of freedom. It had become a battlefield of fear. Long before civilians heard the explosions, they heard the sound. A deep, relentless roar. Thousands of engines moving together like a mechanical storm. For many Germans, this sound meant only one thing: American bombers were coming. At first, the United States Army Air Forces were underestimated. German propaganda described American pilots as poorly trained and reckless, relying on numbers rather than skill. Luftwaffe veterans believed they could easily break these formations. But the reality in the sky told a different story. When German fighter pilots first attacked B-17 flying fortresses, they were shocked. These bombers did not scatter. They flew straight into danger, holding tight formation while heavy machine guns fired from every angle. Even after losing engines, wings damaged, or crew wounded, many American planes refused to turn back. To the Germans watching from their cockpits, this behavior seemed almost suicidal. One Luftwaffe ace later admitted that American pilots fought like men who had already accepted death. This was not recklessness, it was discipline. These crews had been trained to believe that staying together increased everyone's chance of survival. The myth of careless Americans quickly collapsed under gunfire. On the ground, civilians saw the Americans only as faceless enemies bringing destruction from above. Yet rumors spread, stories of bombers flying on despite burning engines, of crews bailing out over enemy territory knowing capture or death awaited them. Between myth and reality stood a hard truth. American pilots were not fearless superheroes, nor were they foolish amateurs. They were young men, often barely in their 20s, flying into the most dangerous airspace on Earth, day after day. To the Germans who faced them in the sky, they became something unexpected, not just enemies, but formidable opponents worthy of RSV. The first time German radar stations detected the incoming formations, operators believed their instruments were malfunctioning. The blips were too many, moving too steadily, too high. Soon, the sky itself confirmed the truth. Massive American bombers were approaching in numbers never seen before. As the clouds parted, Luftwaffe pilots looked up and saw something unsettling. Rows of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators filled the horizon, flying in tight, almost unnatural formations. Their silver bodies reflected the sun, turning the sky into a wall of metal. To many German defenders, it felt less like an air raid and more like an invasion of the heavens. The bombers did not fly like fragile aircraft. They moved slowly but confidently, ignoring flak bursts that exploded around them like black flowers. When German fighters closed in, they were met by a storm of gunfire. Machine guns fired from the nose, tail, belly, and waist positions. No matter where a fighter attacked from, it was answered with bullets. This was why the B-17 earned its terrifying nickname, the Flying Fortress. It was not just a bomber, it was a moving weapons platform. Some aircraft carried up to 13.50 caliber machine guns, operated by crews trained to protect each other through overlapping fields of fire. The B-24, faster and longer ranged, added to the nightmare, extending the reach of American bombing deeper into Germany. German pilots quickly realized these bombers could absorb incredible punishment. Stories spread of B-17s returning to base with half a wing missing, engines destroyed, yet still airborne. What the Germans had expected to be easy targets became armored giants in the sky. From that moment on, the American bombers were no longer underestimated. They were feared, studied, and respected, symbols of a new kind of air war that Germany was no longer prepared to stop. When Luftwaffe fighter pilots first engaged American aircrews, confusion spread almost as fast as fear. The Americans did not fly the way experienced pilots were expected to. They did not break formation under attack. They did not turn away when engines burned or flak tore through their wings. Instead, they pressed forward, straight into danger. At first, many German pilots believed this behavior proved inexperience. Compared to battle-hardened Luftwaffe veterans who had survived years of combat over Europe, American crews seemed rigid, almost robotic. Some German aces mocked them as factory pilots, trained to follow rules rather than adapt in combat. But repeated encounters forced a reevaluation. As attacks continued, Luftwaffe pilots noticed something unsettling. The Americans learned quickly. Each mission became more dangerous. Fighters approaching the bombers faced increasingly coordinated defensive fire. German pilots who lingered too long were often shot down. Survival required faster, riskier attack methods, head-on assaults that came with terrifying odds. Famous German aces began to speak with reluctant respect. One veteran later recalled that American bomber crews showed a calm courage unlike anything we had seen before. Another admitted that the Americans fought as a collective unit, sacrificing individual safety for the survival of the formation. This was not ignorance, it was discipline. Even elite Luftwaffe pilots such as Adolf Galland acknowledged that American crews possessed an unshakable determination. They lacked the long combat experience of German veterans early on, but they compensated with organization, resilience, and an almost stubborn refusal to retreat. By 1944, the debate was settled in the skies over Germany. What had once been dismissed as inexperience was now recognized as something far more dangerous. The Americans were not reckless amateurs. They were courageous, adaptable, and relentless, and they were becoming better with ever. Respect was not given easily in the skies over Europe. It was earned through blood, smoke, and survival. For Luftwaffe pilots, respect for American aircrews came only after witnessing what no training manual could explain. Again and again, German fighters encountered American bombers that should not have remained airborne. B-17s flew on with engines burning, control surfaces shredded, and gaping holes torn through their fuselages. Entire sections of metal were missing, yet the aircraft held formation, stubbornly refusing to fall away. To German pilots watching from nearby cockpits, it was both astonishing and unsettling. There were moments when a single American bomber, clearly crippled, continued toward its target rather than turning back. German pilots expected fear, panic, or retreat. Instead, they saw discipline. Wounded crews fought fires midair, dragged injured comrades back to their positions, and kept their aircraft flying long enough to complete the mission. One Luftwaffe veteran later admitted that these scenes changed how he viewed the enemy. They were not flying machines, he said. They were men with iron nerves. Such words were rare in wartime Germany, yet they spread quietly among experienced pilots. The longer the air war continued, the more these encounters reshaped German opinion. Losses mounted, fuel ran low, and replacements grew younger and less experienced. Meanwhile, American crews returned day after day, absorbing punishment and coming back again. Each damaged bomber that refused to die became a symbol of something the Luftwaffe could not break. By 1944, many German pilots privately acknowledged the truth. The Americans' greatest weapon was not their aircraft, nor their numbers, but their endurance. They did not win respect through speeches or propaganda. They earned it the only way possible, by continuing to fly, even when survival itself seemed impossible. To German commanders, the American way of air war felt unnatural, almost reckless. While other air forces preferred smaller, flexible strikes, the United States Army Air Forces believed in overwhelming force. Their strategy was simple in theory, but terrifying in execution. Massive, daylight bombing raids flown deep into enemy territory. Instead of scattering aircraft, the Americans gathered them. Hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 bombers moved together in tightly organized formations. From the ground, the sky darkened. From the air, it became a moving wall of steel. Each formation protected itself with overlapping defensive fire, turning every bomber group into a flying battlefield. German fighters were trained to attack individual targets, not entire aerial armies. Against these formations, traditional tactics failed. Any pilot who stayed too long within range risked being cut apart by machine gun fire. Losses increased and morale suffered. The Americans were forcing the Luftwaffe to fight on unfavorable terms. Even more frightening was the purpose behind the strategy. American planners targeted factories, rail yards, oil refineries, and aircraft plants, key organs of Germany's war machine. Each mission struck not just cities, but Germany's ability to continue the war. The attacks came in daylight, visible to everyone, leaving no room for denial or propaganda. German leaders quickly realized the danger. These raids could not be ignored, and they could not be easily stopped. Flak guns filled the skies, fighter pilots were pushed to exhaustion, and fuel reserves vanished at an alarming rate. What truly frightened the Germans was not a single raid, but the repetition. Day after day, the bombers returned. Even heavy losses did not slow the campaign. The strategy relied on endurance, production, and relentless pressure, advantages Germany could not match. In the end, American air strategy did more than destroy targets. For years, German fighter pilots believed time was on their side. American bombers were dangerous, but once their limited escorts turned back, the skies belonged to the Luftwaffe. This belief shaped Germany's greatest mistake. That mistake arrived with the P-51 Mustang. Unlike earlier escort fighters, the Mustang could fly with the bombers from England to Berlin and back. Sleek, fast, and deadly at high altitude, it did not simply protect the bombers, it hunted. German pilots soon realized that the air war had changed. They were no longer attackers waiting for exposed bombers. They were now the hunted. The Luftwaffe's fatal error was underestimating escort fighters. German strategy focused on destroying bombers, not fighting enemy fighters in sustained combat. When Mustangs appeared over Germany in large numbers in early 1944, they caught the Luftwaffe unprepared. Veteran pilots were forced into constant battles, draining experience faster than it could be replaced. Mustang pilots did not wait passively near bomber formations. They swept ahead, attacked airfields, and ambushed German fighters as they climbed to altitude. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground before they ever reached the bombers. Fuel shortages worsened, training hours shrank, and inexperienced pilots were thrown into combat against highly trained opponents. Losses became catastrophic. Each German ace shot down was irreplaceable. Meanwhile, American production continued without pause. For the first time, Luftwaffe pilots felt what their enemies had endured for years, fighting without control of the sky. By mid-1944, the outcome was clear. The Luftwaffe no longer dictated when or where battles would be fought. Air superiority had shifted. The P-51 Mustang did not merely escort bombers, it ended an era. From that moment on, Germany's skies belonged to the Allies. For ordinary Germans, the American pilots were first known not by name or face, but by sound. The distant hum of engines grew into a thunder that shook windows and hearts alike. Mothers pulled children into cellars. Factory workers froze in place. Entire cities learned to measure time by air raid sirens. To civilians beneath the bombers, American airmen were symbols of destruction. Homes vanished in firestorms. Streets became rubble. In cities like Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin, anger turned quickly into hatred. Propaganda encouraged it, calling the pilots murderers hiding behind altitude and machines. Yet reality was more complicated. After raids, some Germans looked up and saw damaged bombers limping away, trailing smoke, flying far lower than before. Occasionally, aircraft were shot down nearby. Parachutes opened in the sky, revealing young men drifting helplessly toward the ground. In those moments, hatred clashed with something unexpected: recognition. Many civilians were shocked by how young the captured pilots looked. Some were barely older than their own sons. They were frightened, wounded, often shaking from shock. The image of the cruel, confident enemy did not match the exhausted men standing before them. Still, emotions ran high. After particularly devastating bombings, crowds sometimes attacked downed airmen before soldiers intervened. These brutal incidents revealed the raw pain of civilians who had lost everything. But there were also quieter moments: farmers offering water, women turning away so they would not witness violence, policemen rushing prisoners to safety. Over time, a grim understanding settled in. Germans began to realize that the pilots above were not choosing targets from hatred. They were following orders, just as German soldiers did on other fronts. This did not erase the anger, but it changed its shape. To ordinary Germans, American pilots were never abstract figures of war. They were the men inside the aircraft that turned daylight into terror. Long before the bombs fell, cities heard the warning, the rising drone of engines rolling across the sky. People stopped what they were doing, already knowing what was coming. Life under bombardment reshaped how civilians saw the enemy. Entire neighborhoods disappeared in minutes. Churches collapsed, factories burned, and families were buried beneath their own homes. In the aftermath, anger felt natural. Propaganda fed that anger, telling civilians that American pilots deliberately targeted women and children. But reality refused to stay simple. After raids, Germans sometimes watched crippled bombers struggling away, flying low and uneven. On rare occasions, aircraft crashed nearby. Parachutes opened, and American airmen descended slowly into fields or streets, powerless and exposed. In those moments, the image of the monster faded. Many civilians were stunned by what they saw. The pilots were young, often wounded, terrified, and exhausted. Some spoke broken German or held their hands up in surrender. They did not look like the merciless enemies described on the radio. Emotions collided. In cities that had just been destroyed, rage sometimes erupted into violence against captured airmen. These acts were fueled by grief and loss rather than ideology. Yet even then, others intervened, police officers, soldiers, or civilians who recognized that killing a helpless prisoner would not bring back the dead. Diaries from the time reveal this inner conflict. Civilians wrote of hatred for the bombers and, in the same breath, admiration for the courage required to fly into such defenses. The Americans were blamed for the destruction, but also acknowledged for their persistence. By the final years of the war, many Germans understood a painful truth. The men in the sky were not demons, they were soldiers locked into a brutal system. By 1945, the skies over Germany were no longer a battleground, they were a testament to defeat. For Luftwaffe pilots and German civilians alike, the war in the air had revealed a harsh truth. The United States Army Air Forces had achieved what decades of German planning could not. Daylight bombing raids had crippled industry, destroyed cities, and shattered morale, leaving a nation increasingly aware of its vulnerability. German officers and soldiers, once confident in the invincibility of the Luftwaffe, were forced to confront the reality. Reports of crippled aircraft returning from deep strikes, the relentless advance of long-range P-51 Mustang escorts, and the sheer scale of American air power could no longer be dismissed as propaganda or luck. Respect had long been grudgingly earned, but now recognition was unavoidable. The Allies dominated the skies. Civilians, too, saw the futility of resistance from above. Once hopeful slogans and speeches gave way to silence in bombed-out cities. Factory workers, mothers, and children had endured repeated raids, yet no German fighter could stop them. The Americans' combination of strategic planning, overwhelming production, and disciplined aircrews had achieved the impossible. In private diaries and post-war interviews, many Luftwaffe veterans admitted a mix of fear, respect, and resignation. They acknowledged that American air strategy had shortened the war, saved countless Allied lives, and forced Germany to fight on terms it could no longer control. For the first time, defeat was not abstract. It was visible in the twisted steel of cities, the emptiness of airfields, and the planes that no longer rose to meet the attackers. By the spring of 1945, the consensus was clear. The Luftwaffe could no longer contest the skies, and German pride in its air forces had been broken. The Americans had not only destroyed targets, they had destroyed the illusion of German supremacy in the air, leaving only the stark reality of defeat. After the war, the silence of defeat allowed Luftwaffe veterans to speak more openly about the enemy they had faced. In interviews and memoirs, many aces offered candid reflections on American pilots, revealing a mix of respect, astonishment, and reluctant admiration. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter leaders, famously remarked that the Americans fought with a tenacity and discipline we had never fully anticipated. They accepted danger as a constant companion and refused to break formation, even under the heaviest fire. Other aces echoed similar sentiments. Erich Hartmann, the war's top-scoring fighter pilot, admitted that despite facing thousands of enemy aircraft, the courage displayed by young American crews was extraordinary. They were well-trained, methodical, and utterly determined, he noted, qualities that forced even the most experienced German pilots to adapt or perish. Such acknowledgments were rare during the war, when propaganda demanded that enemies be portrayed as weak or foolish. Post-war interviews further highlighted the paradoxical respect that had grown in combat. Pilots who had once shot at American bombers and fighters now reflected on the personal bravery behind each mission. Many emphasized that the American success was not solely a matter of numbers or machines, but of mindset, discipline, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to complete the mission despite overwhelming odds. This historical recognition extended beyond individual testimonies. Military historians have cited these reflections as critical evidence that American air power earned its reputation not through myth, but through measurable skill and courage. The reluctant respect voiced by Germany's top aces confirmed what contemporary reports had suggested, that the men in the sky were formidable professionals whose endurance and effectiveness reshaped the air war over Europe forever.